Okay, a little technical difficulty there, folks. If we take a look at this stabilization wedge again, it represents what we could do, the steps we could take to halt emissions at the level that they are now. And these are things that we really have the technology to do. You know, in the tragedy of the commons, you read Hardin's ideas about problems to which there are no technical solutions, but there really are only moral solutions, ethical solutions. We have the technical solutions to do everything that represents each of these little stabilization wedges. Renewable energy, again, solar, wind energy, hydroelectric. Can't We're not going to get too much more out of hydroelectric. We've pretty much dammed up all the rivers that have any appreciable or can give us any appreciable amount of electrical energy from hydroelectric power. And in fact, right now the trend is actually to remove some of these dams because they do cause a lot of environmental problems. But the renewable energy is certainly is the way that we need to go. And one good thing is that here in the United States, over the last few years, whereas the fossil fuels, the non renewables, used to receive the lion's share of subsidies, now more of those subsidies are going toward renewable energy. And then we're going to talk a little bit about biodiversity loss. We are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. The difference being that we are now the cause of this extinction. We are losing species every day. We don't know how many species there are on the entire planet. We know that we haven't discovered all of them, but we do know that we lose them on a daily basis. And that is a crime. And, you know, in addition to the ethical aspects of it and the rights of different species to exist and the miracle that they do, um, when we eliminate them and lose them, we have no idea what we've lost in terms of potential new medications, for example, in the future. When you look at this graph, you can see that by far the greatest cause of biodiversity loss is habitat loss. And this is directly related to human population growth and consumption. We are destroying habitats in order to make room for people, in order to harvest wood for homes, in order to turn more land into agricultural land to feed more people. So habitat loss is by far the most important loss or cause of biodiversity loss. Alien species, this is referring to invasives. Invasive species are those which are brought into a new area due to human action, whether it be deliberate or inadvertent, accidental. Overexploitation, this would be overharvesting. This is a major problem in the oceans right now that we're using big industrial trawlers to fish with. And always pollution and disease. But again, the big one, habitat loss. This is showing you some of these, this is showing you what happens when a trawler goes through an area and it completely depletes everything in its way. Whether or not, in addition to the targeted species, it picks up a tremendous amount of bycatch, turtles, other animals that we don't generally eat. So, the value of biodiversity. Pollination, keeping or biological control. We receive resources directly from them. Medicinal value. And let's not forget intrinsic value of species. That is their right to exist because they do. Again, 5 mass extinctions in the past. The difference being that the current extinction is not due to asteroids or volcanoes. It's due to human impact. So, This was a whirlwind trip of a few different resources, but I want to talk a little bit now about how do we measure growth? How do we measure how we're doing? In our country and many other countries, we use the GDP, gross domestic product, which is a measure of the goods and services produced and purchased within a country for, over a given year. Now, so this is measuring goods and services in terms of their monetary value. The problem with this is that there are many benefits that are ignored by the GDP and many costs. Remember, we talked about the fact that ecosystem services are not figured into the costs of products and services that we purchase in this and most other countries. What are benefits ignored by the GDP? Well, for example, when one parent decides to stay home in order to raise children. Most of us think that that's generally a pretty good idea, but there's no monetary value assigned to it. When you volunteer, as I'm sure many of you do, you improve your communities. Your volunteering efforts have tremendous worth, but they are not considered by the GDP. Social costs of, for example, not having somebody, whether it be a family member or someone else, to be there when a child comes home from school in the afternoon, so that he or she is more likely to get into trouble or perhaps fall behind in schoolwork because there's no help available. That kind of thing, that would be a social cost that the GDP does not include. Environmental costs, the pollution, the biodiversity loss that results from growing human population, those things are not included in the GDP. So what Redefining Progress came up with an alternative measure, and that is called the GPI, the Genuine Progress Indicator. It includes these environmental costs, social costs, and economic costs ignored by the GDP, as well as the benefits. And you can see that the GPI is smaller. So in other words, this Genuine Progress Indicator says that we're not making as much progress as the GDP would indicate. So what are some of these values that our modern economy and the GDP do not address? Well, here they are. Use value. The worth that we ascribe to things that we use directly. The option of having something there in the future. Okay, so for example, a forest of intact, mature trees. We don't know what kinds of resources that we might get from those trees in the future, things that we haven't even explored yet. The educational value of the rainforest here that has been maintained. Aesthetic values, the beauty of the natural world. Hard to put a price tag on that. Existence values, the intrinsic value of a particular species just because it has evolved and exists on the planet. It has existence value. And these different kinds of values really reflect our environmental ethics. Roderick Nash is the one that came up with these 3 different environmental ethic positions, so to speak. And he published them in his Rights of Nature. And that is, depending on how we look at the planet, that determines what we value. Our worldview, where does that come from? It comes from our upbringing, it comes from our culture, it comes from our religion. What do we value? Well, if you are an anthropocentric, you look at the world from the perspective of its value to human beings. So you will look at an environmental issue, for example, and decide how important it is based on how it impacts human beings directly. So for example, when you're looking at mountaintop removal to get at coal, to mine coal so that we can burn it to generate electricity. You look at that and you say, well, we need electricity, we need energy, those people need jobs. It's not such a bad thing. If you are a biocentric, that means that you extend your ethical concerns to all living things. So you might look at that mountaintop removal and say, well, what about the other species that are living there? What about the little endemic amphibians that live on those mountaintops and no place else in the world? How is this mountaintop removal going to affect them? Or when the ash settles in the tributaries, the waterways, what about the things that are living in the rivers? Finally, if you are an ecocentric, you look at the bigger picture. You look at the entire ecosystem and how this activity might impact that. So you're going to be looking at how the mining of the coal, the blowing up of the mountain is going to affect not only the animals and not only the people, but also the waterways, the air, the abiotic factors that make up an ecosystem. Briefly want to mention Garrett Hardin. You are reading The Tragedy of the Commons this week, and this was his work that was published in Science Journal in 1968. It's considered a seminal piece of environmental literature because he looks at the commons and what is happening to the commons being any resource that is available to everyone and yet not controlled or managed by any particular person. I'm not going to say much more about that. I want you to read the article yourself and see what you can glean from it. You are also reading about Easter Island, some important lessons for us in Easter Island. A population of people, a thriving population of people that overused all of their resources and caused their own demise because they were on an island and didn't have access to resources in the outer world. So we've done a very quick survey of a few different ideas here in terms of population growth and conservation of resources. Certainly can't do justice to it in a couple of weeks or in one chapter in a book, but I'm hoping that this will get you thinking as a citizen of the planet, but also in terms of your project that you're going to be doing, ideas of sustainability and how can you make your organizations more sustainable so that we can start moving toward a more sustainable society. One where we are not just looking at the bottom line, the economic bottom line, is there a profit being made, but one where we're balancing environmental issues, concerns with economic performance as well as social needs, the needs of other human beings. And when we have these three goals in balance, we then are on our way toward achieving true sustainability.